The arrest and killing of the drug boss known as El Mencho and the cartel violence that followed in many Mexican states is all people are talking about, especially here in Maria Dolores Aguirre's shop in Tapalpa, in the Mexican province of Jalisco. Guadalajara is just 2 hours away by car. Millions of foreign football fans are due to arrive for the World Cup in June. Maria is worried that the violence will scare tourists off.
The government is going to have a lot of security. I think it will have an impact because everyone just saw what happened, and of course, people are going to think twice about coming. Yes, it will have an impact.
Travellers are worried too. There's tighter security at the international airport at Puerto Vallarta, but transfer passengers describe chaotic scenes in Guadalajara.
As soon as we arrived in Guadalajara, we were waiting for the flight, when suddenly everyone came running in, scared, saying that people were going to come in and shoot at us. So we all ran under the tables. They were telling us not to go into the bathrooms, and no one came out, no one from the airport, to tell us what was happening.
Many businesses across the region have shut since the violence broke out.
We were hungry yesterday. We had no food yesterday. Nothing. Nothing was open. It was a terrifying day yesterday. My daughter saw the cartel light a car on fire right in front of us. There was fire all around us. It was terrifying.
But experts do not think the security situation has worsened. It's the opposite. The arrest and killing of the drug boss could boost the FIFA World Cup matches in Mexico and tourism.
It would have been worse for the World Cup if he was still alive. The Mexican authorities proved that they were capable of capturing him. And I think that that shows that they will be able to provide security for the World Cup.
But that all depends on Mexico's security forces bringing the late El Mencho's drug cartel under control and ending the violence. Since the beginning of the week, over 70 people have been killed.
Let's get more from journalist Katie Silva in Mexico City. Welcome back to DW, Katie. So the country's struggle to try and rein in this cartel violence goes back decades. Is the security situation now, is that different? Is it worse? Is it just a blip, or is this just business as usual?
Well, some say actually that at the moment, perhaps the security situation is almost even better because we have seen the power of the National Guard, of course, the deploying of 10,000 troops. The issue right now is we've seen that very dramatic, almost propaganda-like response from the cartel on Sunday. Now it's the common thing that happens time and time again when we see something like this in Mexico is it's the wait and see, and it's a waiting for the cartel to get their action into gear. That could be days, that could be months. It's really unclear how long that might take. And so there's certainly a sense of trepidation right now, but Mexicans I've been speaking with say this isn't new. You know, there was on Sunday, Monday, the streets were very quiet. People wanted to be home before dark. Tuesday, people were out and about again. So it does seem to be a society that is somewhat resilient to some of this. The interesting thing to note, as I say, was the kind of propaganda-like nature of Sunday. What the Jalisco cartel really did here was show their geographic reach. These relatively small, burning out a couple of vehicles here and there in some instances, but across almost a dozen states. What it did show was just how far their geographic reach is, and I think that is probably scary to some. And we also saw, of course, the use of kind of AI-generated videos spreading on social media. So we did in some ways see a new type of warfare that we haven't really seen as much of here in the past.
And I guess one other difference here is that the weekend's violence touched popular tourist spots. Give us an idea of how important tourism is for Mexico.
It's very important. So it makes up about 8 to 9% of the country's GDP, about $30 billion it brought in the last couple of years. For Puerto Vallarta, which of course is a tourist city, about 80% of its economy is based on tourism. And the other thing that's interesting to note here is that we saw a number of tourist centres as being the areas that were the most hit. For example, Cancun in the east, all the way to Puerto Vallarta in the west. So it is a really significant part of the economy. The other element to note here as well is that this is a very busy time for Mexico's tourism season. A lot of people from North America, Canada, and the US trying to escape the cold, come down here. Spring break is next month. And so this is normally a very busy time for the tourism season. And we are already hearing, cancelled flights, people getting refunds, a lot of hesitation to travel here. So yeah, it will have an impact.
OK, but so that's the tourist, but of course this is everyday life for millions of people there in Mexico. Is there widespread support for the way the government is dealing with the gangs and drugs trade there?
I think that, as in everything, people are very, very mixed. So this very dramatic taking out of El Mencho, that was, of course, a lot of that came from pressure from Washington. Washington, of course, trying to stem the flow of drugs into the US. And we've heard, for example, even President Trump posting after it that Mexico needs to do more to stop the cartels. So whether or not this is a win domestically and politically at home for Claudia Sheinbaum, that remains to be seen. We have heard she has been very, very tough on the cartels, particularly vocally. And previous to this event, polls suggested that people felt she wasn't necessarily doing enough when it comes to organised crime. The issue here is that the cartels in general don't affect the lives of Mexicans on a day-to-day basis, but they do when we see something like this, a kingpin taken out. Of course, people scared to leave their homes, can't take their children to school or daycare. Schools across in numerous states closed. And so whether or not that's going to have a positive or a negative impact on the way people feel about it, I think we're going to have to wait and see when it comes to polls in the next couple of months.
Give us an idea of what's behind the intractability of this problem. Mexico has almost become sort of byword for narco state. We just accept that this is a huge problem there. But why? Why is it the way Mexico is run? Is it the way the cartels are run? Why has the government been... Why is it so deeply entrenched, and why has the government been so unable to get rid of it?
It's the power and it's the economy. There's that classic question, how do you solve a problem like the cartels? And the fact is that they're worth so much money. The Jalisco cartel traded in the order of billions of dollars. So sometimes the cartels have more money than the government themselves. They certainly have very sophisticated weaponry. The Jalisco cartel are known, for example, for very sophisticated attacks. They found in Tapalpa grenades, rocket launchers. They've used drones previously. It's like an army. And so it has certainly been very, very difficult to counter. Of course, there is this pressure from the US, and that would very much aid, and we already saw that with the intelligence sharing, that would very much aid the Mexican government to do more. But there's issues when it comes to corruption. There's issues when it comes to security. As I said, they're a very powerful political force as well. And I think for many people, they feel if they're not impacting their day-to-day lives, whilst it's a shame they're there, and it does add a feeling of insecurity in general to the society, almost taking them down has a great political cost, a huge cost potentially to human life. And so that's that part of that intractability, is how do you solve a problem like that?
OK, so a final brief word then. I'm a tourist, I'm a football fan thinking about going to Mexico for the World Cup. What would be your advice to me?
Well, I am neither an expert in tourism nor, a member of an embassy. Of course, we have heard from the US and Canadian authorities saying to only, essential travel, only to certain places. I think that's a big part of it. It's exactly where you go. Here in Mexico City, we've felt relatively unscathed. But of course, in Jalisco, that has been somewhat different. I think it'll be interesting to see whether or not the games do, in fact, go ahead. There was 4 games scheduled in Jalisco, whether or not they continue to hold them there. Monterrey and Mexico City, the 2 other places where there's games scheduled to be held, I think there's generally a feeling that it's going to be safe. We've heard, of course, from FIFA's president, Gianni Infantino, saying that it's likely to be safe, the president here as well. But I think it's a bit of a wait and see how the next couple of months go.
Thanks, Katie. Journalist Katie Silva in Mexico City.